You're listening to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
Hey, everybody. Glad you could be here. This is a great episode. So current, so relevant, given what's going on with the confirmation hearings with the Christine Blasey Ford allegations of attempted rape. Also with the good news regarding the Nobel Prize in Physics given to a woman for the first time in 117 years. And another woman, Frances Arnold, a biochemical engineer at Caltech, also getting a bit of the Nobel Prize. She shares the Nobel Prize, technically. That's why I say she gets a bit of it. She gets half of the $1 million prize. By the way, I don't think they're necessarily in it for the money, but just because I began the thought, half of $1 million prize for conducting the first directed evolution experiments in 1993. She did all these experiments on the ways that chemicals and drugs can be manipulated, and using their own evolution, they can evolve these proteins and viruses. I had to give up that research because it was just a little too complicated for me, but it's nice that Frances Arnold picked it up. And by the way, again, on this week where women are disparaged and devalued by the way that Christine Blasey Ford has been treated, and other victims of sexual assault and attempted sexual assault have also been discounted and devalued by the president, by the GOP leadership. In this news cycle, that honestly embarrassing way that we're talking about these sexual assault allegations coexists with these scientists who are women who are being recognized by the Nobel Committee for outstanding research and breakthroughs in science. So keeping with the theme of what's happening with women, Merrill Markoe and Megan Koester wrote and recorded The Indignities of Being a Woman. It's an audio book, takes you through history, and let's be honest, history is not filled with examples of how women are being well taken care of by the men who set up the society. So there's so many specific examples, and Merrill and Megan go back into history thousands of years and sort of track how women have been treated. And Merrill and Megan make the reprehensible way that society and cultures have treated women somehow entertaining as they catalog it all and go through many of the specifics. So Megan Koester, writer, comedian, teams up with Merrill Markoe, writer, producer, creator, many would say, of The Attitude and so many of the famous bits that gave the show that David Letterman did. First the daytime show and then the late night show, the fabric of comedy that made it so great. We'll get into the history of women and, as they say, the indignities of being a woman in the second part of the show. We'll start with Michael Shure, who will handicap this Brett Kavanaugh thing. As you know, Michael had predicted in our last episode that Kavanaugh is going to go down. I think they're going to push this guy through, but Michael really knows so many of the X's and O's politically. We'll get into that first. I think Michael's segment runs about 22 minutes, something like that, and then the rest of the show is Merrill and Megan. Elvis Weinstein joins me for the second half of the episode for the conversation with Merrill and Megan as well. I'll take just a quick second to thank you for the ways you support us, all these different ways that you share the episode, that you subscribe, that you get the word out. It all helps grow the audience. Any 5-star reviews you leave us in the iTunes world actually moves us up the queue. So if you leave 5 stars, you can go, hey, liked it, love this episode, enjoy it, catch it when I can. Whatever you say, even just a couple of words, as I say, in the search process helps move us closer to the top. I've talked about the money. We don't take commercials. There'll never be a commercial on this show. If you want to contribute, you can do it through the PayPal link. And there are those who have sent us things to the PayPal link, and there are others who will go on and click on the Amazon link on our site. That's the other way you can spin us off a couple of dollars. If you're going to shop Amazon anyway, the Amazon link is on all the episodes. Anywhere it says Amazon, click on it. Same Amazon. Doesn't change your experience on Amazon at all, but whatever you spend, we'll get a little piece of it, and it just shows up at the end of the month and helps keep the lights on here. I wonder if those Nobel Prize winners with some of that Nobel Prize money want to spin off anything to the podcast. It just occurred to me. But congratulations again to the Nobel Prize winners. The professor, Donna Strickland, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics. She's a Canadian. And Frances Arnold, the biochemical engineer at Caltech. Congratulations, ladies. And now, let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage, it means.
They let guys just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
edge-show.com. edge-show.com. The hyphen is stupid. edge-show.com.
edge-show.com.
All right, everybody, seats please, seats please. He's here, our political guru, Michael Shure.
Thank you very much. There should be kind of, Indian music playing here.
Yeah, for Guru-esque.
Exactly.
It is a busy season. We talk about it, the ramp up to the midterms. I want to talk to you about the Kavanaugh thing. Before that, anything in the midterms that we should particularly keep an eye on? I keep hearing about the blue wave.
Well, I mean, there is a path to the Senate for the Democrats that is legitimate and becoming more and more legitimate. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It doesn't mean that the polling is, but there are too many races that Republicans don't want within the margin of error or Democrats to be ahead as incrementally as they are because of the wave. So the conventional wisdom being that if polling says an endangered Democrat is up 3 points in a margin of error for race, she's no longer or he's no longer endangered because of that. That's the conventional wisdom. The facts are, obviously, that we still have to have an election, and It doesn't mean as much. But in a year when Democrats are going to lift other Democrats or the Republicans are going to sink their own, I think those numbers should be encouraging to people who want to see the Democrats win the Senate or have that kind of inkling that it may happen. There is a path. It's still not likely, but there's definitely a path.
So when you look at the actual data, where it's coming from, and examine those districts from which it's being gathered, you can speak about some of these things with a greater sense of confidence. I'm asking this question against the backdrop of what happened with the general election when all polls showed that Hillary Clinton was going to sweep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a national election. National elections are a lot different. Polling in states is a lot different. You're polling in a congressional district or in one single state. It's a lot more concentrated. The people who do the local polling in those places are a lot more accustomed to how polls are held. So I think that it's important to remember that part of it, that the accuracy, the science, the polling science is actually not as good because they don't have the resources that the national pollsters do. But that said, the results that you get looking at the margin of errors is often better and more reliable because of their familiarity with where they are.
Just because you mentioned the science, what, for example, is a way that they do some of these congressional district polls?
Well, they do. I mean, they do likely voters. They find out who voted at certain times. Did they vote in the last three midterms? Did they vote in 2006, 2010, 2014, right? That's important. And if they are regular voters, how have they trended in those races previously?
And then they seek them out by phone.
They seek them out by phone, mostly by phone. Still, I mean, you're not doing anything over the internet. It's a lot of calling. So you need a landline to be part of those polls? Not all of them. I mean, that's the evolution that's happening now, is that a lot of those people don't have landlines anymore. So they're having lower percentages of landline contact, higher percentages of cell phone contact, and then they do a repeat contact so that they make sure that they're getting the right person on cell phones, and that they'll try a landline again and make sure that there's nobody at that landline. So they're being a little more diligent about giving up than they used to be, or not giving up. And so that's kind of the way that it's trended differently. A local paper, let's say you're the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, right? They have the ability to do that in a concentrated way, whereas the Quinnipiac College or Gallup does it in a sort of more macro way. So there's that. Now, another midterm to talk about is I was just in Florida covering Andrew Gillum, the Democrat running for governor. He's the nominee in the governor's race. Sure. And he is the most impressive person I've seen on the trail so far, more than Beto O'Rourke, more than other. I've just hit the way he campaigns. And I saw some unimpressive Democrats. Just that he's a good politicker. His stump speech is very good. It's tight. It's concise. He is great at talking to people. His energy seems boundless. He has this sort of transcendent personality that I think will work in politics. He's young, exuberant. He is careful, but he is also passionate, because a lot of people who are passionate are less careful. And so I think that he is, and I think that he will help in that state. I think already his presence in that race has made it better for Bill Nelson, who is an older, lackluster, dull politician going up against one of the most formidable governors in the country in Rick Scott. And I think that that's going to help Bill Nelson a lot. It's going to help congressional candidates a lot.
Again, this is all Florida. And
that's all Florida. It's just where I was.
No, I
week,
understand.
So,
but and Florida's pivotal, though, because...
Florida's pivotal for the Senate. Democrats can't afford to lose that seat because it means they have to win in a place that they don't expect to. And even what it means is that neutralizes winning in a place that you don't expect to if you lose that. I mean, for obvious reasons. A lot of the House is counting on picking up a couple of those seats for Democrats. I met a Republican who is more impressive than a Democrat there. I've met a few Democrats who I think will be okay because of the way that their districts are played out. But Florida is, if Gillum holds up, they're going to have a lot of people are going to have Gillum to thank. That's just a predictive thing for me.
Let's get on to the Kavanaugh hearings. Yeah. The initial round of the Kavanaugh stuff was pretty much without incident. We talked about this when you were here last. In fact, when you were last here, the initial accuser, this Christine Blasey Ford, she had just come forward, although we knew some things. Now we know a lot more. We've heard her testimony.
Correct.
You know, I often talk about the fact that so much in Washington, particularly when it comes to some of these congressional hearings, is theatrics. You know,
right.
there are certainly theatrical moments and moments where people are playing for the cameras or they're playing for the president in the case of the Kavanaugh stuff. Then there are also moments of immense authenticity, and certainly her testimony felt that way. And similarly, it seemed to be acknowledged to have been authentic by even the opposing party. Kavanaugh came on like a ton of bricks. He came on fiery, came on emotional. At times, it seemed as though he was playing to the president.
Yeah.
When he called out the Clintons and he called out sort of what was a left-wing conspiracy.
Playing to the media. I mean, he's already done all the playing to the president he can do.
Well, but the president wants to hear that message cleanly articulated and well represented by this candidate, don't you think, to the media?
Yeah, only because he's embattled. But at that time, Brett Kavanaugh didn't think he was embattled, so he didn't think he would need the support of the president. I thought the president's support was pretty lukewarm that day. And then the next day, the president kind of doubled down because I think his team said, no, you can't be lukewarm on this. You have to hold the line here. So I guess that's possible. But I do think that he was playing to the media and playing to the Republican base and playing really to people who earlier that day he started to lose.
Yeah, I told you at the end of our little conversation last time about Kavanaugh that I thought he would be confirmed. This is before all of these other additional allegations have come forward and before the FBI, quote, investigation. We'll talk about that. It's very limited. But I believe they are going to push this through. I think they do have the votes and they have the political will, it seems, because of those votes. I understand it's a thin vote, but they are going to push this through. And now, particularly this group, this GOP, doesn't back down. And they consider it, it's almost jihadist. They want to push this through for any number of reasons that have to do with political identity and the strength of the party. I know you, in the last conversation, just to remind everybody, Michael didn't think that Kavanaugh would be confirmed. He has faith in this process, ultimately, was his point last time. And I'm wondering if you still think that the Kavanaugh confirmation won't go through.
I haven't changed. I think that nothing that happened changed me. Listen, when I heard that Jeff Flake was a yes on Kavanaugh, it gave me pause because I didn't think he would be. I didn't know what he was going to do, but I didn't think he was just going to be a straight yes and say the institution's done its job. And yeah, I understand the other side too in a weird way, in that they say it's a he said, she said, and there's no way to prove that. But I thought that the nominee, the temperament and demeanor of the nominee, would have made some of these senators rethink it. So I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think he's going to be confirmed. And I think what Jeff Flake did was run cover. He's a guy who's not running for re-election.
Which is why a no vote would have seemed so easy for him.
Right. Well, nothing's just so easy, right? I mean, he is a conservative Republican. He would like Brett Kavanaugh, who isn't Brett Kavanaugh, the specific, but he'd like everything about his judicial point of view to be on the court. He's still a conservative, Jeff Flake, and reliably so. I mean, as much as rhetorically difficult as he's been for Donald Trump, he's also supported him. He's also supported him most of the time. So anyway, so I think what happened was, and on Thursday night I was in Washington and I spoke to Senator Richard Blumenthal, the Democrat who's on the committee, and Senator Blumenthal said to me, I asked him, I said, are there Republican colleagues that you know, without naming names, that are lukewarm on this nomination? And he said, yeah, he said there are people that are fence sitters, and he feels like there are Republican fence sitters and Democratic fence sitters, and that's what he said to me. So what I thought then was there's no way this guy's going to get confirmed, right? Because and Jeff Flake was exactly what needed to happen. He's somebody who's not running for re-election, as I stated, so that he has the cover. He can take a bullet for everybody else. Everybody can point to Jeff Flake and say, well, Senator Flake did that, and, we just didn't get it through. Blame Flake. On the other side, Flake is kind of immune to it, because let's say he has greater aspirations, which I suspect he does, because I think if you run for mayor, you want to run for president. I think that he wants to be governor, and I think he may want to run for president one day. He can say, once a conservative judge is on this court, which one will be, because Donald Trump will still nominate the next judge, once a conservative justice is there, he can say, listen, that was distracting. There were too many doubts about that guy, but look who we have on the court now. And it's because I did that. I wouldn't have done this if I had known that there would be a liberal judge coming to the court, something like that. So anyway, that was done.
You're saying when he called for an FBI investigation, that was the cover they needed?
That was the cover they needed. And now it's still not going to be about Christine Blasey Ford. If he doesn't get on the court, it's going to be about perjury. It's going to be about lying. I think a lot of little lies add up. One little lie maybe doesn't, but he's sitting for the Supreme Court justice position.
Well, they add up to you. I just wonder if they add up to these. I mean, you look at Lindsey Graham. You look at those who've been...
It may not add up to Lindsey Graham, but it might add up to a senator whose name you don't know. It might add up to Mike Enzi in Wyoming. It might add up to Joe Manchin, who, some of these Democrats are on the fence about it. Heidi Heitkamp. It may add up to them. And when you look at that, it doesn't really matter if it adds up to Lindsey Graham. It's clearly not going to. But that's not who they're after here. They're not after Lindsey Graham.
I am glad to hear you say it's not necessarily about Blasey Ford, because whether or not these sexual allegations are investigated sufficiently, and it doesn't appear as though the FBI investigation is very limited. It's a week long. You can only speak to 4 witnesses if you want to.
Right. Today, though, the White House said they can speak to whoever they want, but it's got to be done Friday.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't know what to believe and who to believe, and even what's said out of the White House, I don't necessarily believe. But put it all aside. Now to your perjury point. He doesn't appear to have told the truth in committee about his participation in what was both the situation with the Clintons, which is why he references the Clintons, right? That was having to do with working with Ken Starr during the mess with Monica Lewinsky, and also in relation to George Bush, right?
Yeah.
That perjury is serious enough to leave a mark?
Yeah, any perjury does.
Why was it then not referenced in these hearings?
Because this was what, when they talked about it, they went past that, right? They blew past that, the Senate did. Again, not everybody knows if he was perjuring himself then, but an investigation now into any kind of perjury is going to be off-putting for him. One thing also to say and to further it about the women and the allegations is that it was good theater in the elevator, right? When those women approached him, it was breathtaking. But I don't think that's what flipped Jeff Flake. I think Jeff Flake flipped because of Chris Coons, his colleague who was on 60 Minutes with a Democratic colleague. And I think when he heard that Chris Coons got emotional hearing that he was a yes, he contacted Coons and they talked, and that's when things started to happen. And I find it fascinating, but I do think, Democrats are going to be very excited if Kavanaugh doesn't get on this court. They're not going to be excited by who is put forward in front of the Senate afterwards.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There are 24 other names on that list.
Right, but so then it just becomes a question of who is, but if they have to pass a Democratic Senate, it's going to be a little bit different, right? It's going to be, the president's not just going to be able to put any name up there. And Democrats on this seat especially, this swing seat, the Anthony Kennedy seat, which is, if it's filled by conservatives, is going to turn John Roberts into the swing vote on the court. And John Roberts is a pretty conservative guy, as we know. Democrats want to steer clear of that. They'll fight this for a while until it becomes politically untenable and they seem obstructionist. But there's going to be a conservative on this court. The next justice is. Many people are just saying it shouldn't be Kavanaugh, and Republicans are having a harder time saying it.
So let me just understand where you're coming from on Kavanaugh and whether or not he's going to withdraw or not. And you feel that he is going to withdraw, or
I don't think he's going to withdraw. I think that he is not going to be voted on. But I think when it gets to the floor of the Senate after this investigation is complete, that he will not be approved by the Senate.
And the Jeff Flake part of that whole equation was that Flake who had indicated he believed in Kavanaugh, that is to say he was ready to vote yes, but he felt that these were legitimate questions that came up and should be ordered investigation, has given them cover to say, hey, there are enough significant questions here that we could find a better candidate.
Jeff Flake is saying blame Jeff Flake if he doesn't get on the court.
But they're going to blame him that way.
And it's giving the finger to the White House for Jeff Flake, too, in a way that he hasn't done with votes, but he's been a victim of the White House.
Now because I think they are going to try to push this through. They're going to try to push it through because they want him to be serving on the bench immediately. There's Supreme Court business that's very relevant to them, including
First Monday in October.
Yeah, exactly. So they're really pushing this, and I think they will push it, which is why there's the time frame. That's why when you see this, well, if they really cared about finding the truth, they wouldn't have a time clock on it. Well, they don't care about finding the truth. I mean, it's a process. And when I say they, I am talking about the GOP. They're trying to get this nominee through. And my point is simply they're going to use Flake the other way. I think Flake has indicated, I'm a yes vote, but we need to do this FBI investigation. By ordering up the FBI investigation, they can say, look, we did this. Of course, there are questions. There are questions about everybody. There are no perfect people.
Right.
Let's vote. Let's get this thing done. I think they're using Flake as cover to push it through.
I mean, that's the other side to my argument. I don't think that's what's going on. I mean, and also to say that Flake is a yes vote. Flake was a yes vote in committee. He would have been a no vote on the floor until this happened. Right? I mean, that's what he said by starting this. That morning, would he have been? I don't think so. He would have voted yes on the floor. But once he had this kind of re-examination and he saw the reaction that it garnered and how many people, I don't think Jeff Flake really understood how many people were relying upon his vote in this situation, which is ironic because he's an unremarkable senator in the whole scheme of things. Rhetorically, he has been someone who's spoken up against the president. I'm repeating myself, but he hasn't done very much actively to back that up. Because he's a conservative, he's a Republican, and generally things that are before the Republican Senate, all Republicans are going to like. But he's now in this remarkable position for someone who has not been a remarkable Senate. And this is probably as a senator, and it's probably as an important a moment in our lives for a senator who is not going to be up for re-election, who's retiring. I mean, this is a period where those people generally don't matter.
Look, one of the reasons I love talking to Michael Shure is because he just understands a lot of the X's and O's that I think can get lost in the headlines and a lot of the fire around this. So I enormously respect what you bring to this conversation in terms of what's happening in the Senate and what's happening in the vote beyond the media spectacle. So I guess we'll see.
Well, I guess we'll see. And of course, he's not invited back if he's wrong.
Seldom wrong. So things to watch for, Michael Shure?
Obviously, you want to see what they come back with, but you also, I think, want to hear a little bit about senators. I mean, Joe Donnelly said he was a no. That's an Indiana senator who's in a tight race. And I think they're starting to see that it doesn't matter. Joe Donnelly is not the same as Heidi Heitkamp. Joe Donnelly needs every Democrat in Indianapolis to come out, which is the big center, and in Gary, the big center, to make sure that he doesn't lose them. So there's a political calculation where, 8 people in, Heitkamp needs Fargo, but if you leave Fargo to Bismarck, it's not like they're these huge numbers that would react. And
every single person counts.
Yeah, every single person counts.
All right. Well, I have no mail for you this week.
That's too bad. Well, we'll check the box. We'll check the box. I do like the mail. But,
if you have anything you want to say to Michael, you can say it through edgewithmarkthompson at gmail.com, or you can just light him up on Twitter like everybody else does.
Right.
He's at Michael Shure, and Shure is spelled like the microphone company, Shure, at Michael Shure. Ladies and gentlemen, he is ours, at least for a few minutes every week. Michael Shure!
Thank you all. Thank you. You're the best.
edge-show.com. edge-show.com. The hyphen is stupid. edge-show.com.
Hey, everybody, why don't you do me a favor and like The Edge with Mark Thompson on Facebook? Yeah, that's going to bring in the kids.
And now I'll be joined by J. Elvis Weinstein, Merrill Markoe, and Megan Koester. And this warning, officially, this is an official warning. If you're offended by adult language or adult themes, proceed with caution. There are plenty of both in the minutes that follow.
Yeah. Did you see that piece of footage of Trump today talking to a woman reporter?
Yes.
They prefer to be called lady
awful.
reporters.
That was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Was he saying that thinking she couldn't hear him?
No,
He
I
set
think
it into a microphone.
Right. And he was like, "Excuse me." She was like, "What was that?"
Because
and
Andy
I mean,
was
you
saying,
could see that fork in the road in her mind, which is, do I take this guy on right now? And you know what I mean? And she decided to wave it off. And, that is kind of what a lot of your audiobook reminds me of. It's the move along, get along of women through the centuries. You've had to sort of just put up with so much shit.
it's
And-
unbelievable the amount of shit, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I mean, it really is.
You could fill a book with that kind of shit.
But Andy was saying she should have said to him, nothing further, I have my answer now.
Yeah.
Cut him off at the knees because he would have been, wait.
Yeah, but I don't know if that quite would have worked in that context. Maybe it would have. I don't know. I think you then run the risk of making it about yourself. She took the high road. She didn't make it about herself. She decided to move on with
But
the
he
question.
just really insulted her.
Of course.
Well, thank God taking the high road always works.
That's right.
Yeah, amazing.
That's
why
how
us
Hillary
libtards
got to
are in
office.
charge. Exactly.
It's a pleasure to have a couple of very funny people, very learned people in the studio with us. But before I get to the learned people, I'd like to welcome J. Elvis Weinstein.
Why? Thank you. Mark.
Yes. Josh.
Thank you.
Josh has a movie. It's called I Need You to Kill. And where can people get that movie?
It's streaming on Amazon Prime, and then you can pay for it elsewhere.
So do check it out. It's about comics in Asia. It's about American comics going to Asia, and it's very funny.
As well as the Asian comedy scenes that are growing there.
Right. It's revealing and really cool. And now our guests, Megan Koester and Merrill Markoe. I've known Merrill's work first being the prime mover with David Letterman on television. She made that show what it became, this legendary late-night talk show. She's a producer, she's a writer, she's a performer, and it's really cool to have you here with us.
And I do some opera. Not today, I won't.
Oh, maybe in another
Yeah.
episode. And Megan Koester, and you spell your name Koester.
Right. You would think Koester, right?
Or some version of that.
Mm-hmm. Keisters refuse to be wrong, even in spite of, insurmountable evidence that they are wrong. I was just raised to pronounce it Koester, and here we are now.
I grew up a Weinstein in a Weinstein world. And, it's been hard, especially the last year. It's been hard.
That's true. You thought you were off the hook, and then...
I stopped correcting people until the last year.
More to the point, you decided to take on this project. The Indignities of Being a Woman is what it's called. It's an audio book.
Although they like us to call it an audible original.
Oh. Well, it's an audible original.
8.5 hours of bliss.
It's cool, though. You do break it up into bite-sized morsels. The bites are about 45 minutes or so, right?
Yeah.
Right. 12 chapters.
And then you sub-bite it by each taking half of those chapters.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then we microbite it by then discussing amongst ourselves in between chapters.
Merrill
There's a lot of
explains,
snackable content.
Merrill explains that you guys represent sort of different generations, so that's helpful to the take on things, because you guys are coming at it from different perspectives.
But we also divided life up. I'm doing like 5,000 BC to 1900, and she's doing 20th and 21st century.
Yeah, she does a little bit more heavy lifting than I do.
So in all of this is all of this information I had no idea of, and I'm sure the audience will be astounded almost start to finish with the things that...
We can't swear on this, can we?
Yeah, you can swear.
We can say the S word and everything?
Uh-huh.
It's just, it's incredible the amount of shit women have been eating since 5000 BC. It was astonishing to me. I thought we were going to get something that was a little bit drudgery-oriented and not that pleasant. I had no idea what real horror, nightmarish, irritating, terrible stuff was the history of women in civilization. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah, it is the opposite of fun facts.
Yeah, that's right.
Although we worked hard to make jokes everywhere anyway.
Yeah, we got a marital rape through line. Absolutely. I mean, we try and have fun with it.
You do have a marital rape through line. Now,
Yeah.
tell us about just because you mentioned this marital rape thing. In essence, rape is sanctioned by the institution of marriage.
It was, yeah. And also,
But it
if
was
you're
for a long
Trump's
time.
lawyer, you still think that
Okay.
you can't rape your wife. But yeah, it wasn't really illegal until the 70s.
It was more inclusive. with the marriage experience.
Yeah, it's kind of part of the whole package.
Yes.
There was a phrase, and I can't remember, it was a judicial phrase from the 1800s in England. When you're married, you become one person, and that one person is the man. Mm-hmm. It's the rule of something, and I'm forgetting what that, I mention it often in the book, and I've already blanked out what that is. But it was a legal ruling.
And marriage is, at its root, just a business arrangement, right? That was made, it started.
That's where it started.
Right, that way.
It was about joining empires and acquiring land. It didn't start taking on any kind of romantic thing until I think it's the 1600s or the 1700s. It was a long time where it was just joining of property.
You quoted a philosopher. It was like,
amazing how awful the philosophers were to
yes, yeah. Actually, I had that very same thought. I'm like, wow, these are the philosophers that were always quoting. You know, these guys were totally down on women.
Confucius say what?
Yeah. What? Give me the Confucius thing. There's something from Confucius.
I have it here. I'll have to
the best
find
something
it.
about staying quiet.
Yeah, this is her favorite quote. She wants to put it on a tea towel.
Well, tea towel. I almost had Andy set it to music. I have just pages of quotes I brought in case you asked me about them.
Yeah.
Like Martin Luther said, "Let them bear children until they are dead. That is what they are for."
Yeah, that's quaint.
Thank you. Thank you.
He
Well,
hated
in
women
his
more than
defense,
Jews.
women died in their 30s in his time, all right? So they could have kids until they died.
Yeah, to be fair.
I mean, let's give the man a little fucking credit.
But you have a bunch of them in there.
Aristotle, the worst. Well, yeah, actually, now that I have to, because I'm not online, I have these on paper. I have to find the piece of paper.
That's okay.
Let's talk amongst yourselves, and
yeah. What you're doing, but
traffic.
It's just that all of your heroes, like those who you associate with,
brilliance.
with an elevated
learnedness.
Yeah, with learnedness and elevated view of the world.
Enlightened thinking, yeah.
Yeah, right. They all disappoint, it seems.
Yes.
It was as though it's so boilerplate that women are shit.
Right.
That
it was boilerplate. You know what was astonishing to me is I knew nothing about Aristotle really until I started researching this stuff. I really hadn't looked into I knew Aristotle from just that name being taught in school and a list of names of famous philosophers from ancient Greece. I didn't really know exactly what he said or didn't say, but he really didn't like women.
Right. And then
he said they were
passed
just
that on to
inferior
Alexander
men.
the Great, who then spread it throughout the world.
Right. Here's Confucius. He said, this was his advice to women. When walking, don't turn your head. When talking, don't open your mouth wide. When sitting, don't move your knees. When standing, don't rustle your skirts. When happy, don't exult with loud laughter. When angry, don't raise your voice. If you have to go outside, cover your face. Conceal yourself as much as possible. Establish your proper self so as to become a true human being. A lobotomized true human being, but a true one nevertheless. He didn't say that part. I'm adding that.
Yeah, that predated lobotomies, to be clear.
And do you think, through your research, do you think a lot of this was like that attitude was tied into the property aspect of cover yourself because another man may take your property?
No, you want to know where it started as far as the people who convinced me that that's where it started. I was researching this obviously, but the common thought is they used to trace lineage, what people who are empire building, they used to trace lineage through the mother because it just makes sense. When a baby is coming out between someone's legs, you often think that they are related. So they would trace the lineage that way, and at some point, and they don't know what point that is because it was pre-writing, men decided they wanted to trace the lineage through the father, which is what we do now, which is why my last name is my father's last name. At that point, at the point at which men wanted the fatherhood to be the lineage tracer, they had to then take possession of women and treat them as property because you don't really know who the father is. There's 9 months there unless you're watching her for the whole 9 months.
And it stayed that way in Judaism. You still trace Judaism through the mother. That's
right.
That's the
yeah. I only wish that I was very hopeful because I knew that Judaism, which is I wasn't actually raised in Judaism, but it's the lineage of my family. I was hopeful that they would have a sort of more enlightened view.
Nope.
They say the Orthodox Jews say a prayer every day that thank God that you didn't make me a woman.
Right. And while you're at it, go cleanse yourself after your menstruation.
Oh, well, the cleansing, yes. Yeah. None of the religions like menstruation. They're all disgusted and frightened by it, really.
Well, think of how much time you save having to wear a wig every day, though. if you're Orthodox.
True.
That's the other thing, that they do a whole thing in your audio. What is it again?
It's an audio book, really, but it's supposed to be a book. They say it's a book.
It's book read out loud.
Right.
An audio book.
So you have a whole thing in your audio book about hair and what Megan was just mentioning, which was the wig, and you have to do all this stuff when I'm talking about a Hasidic Jew, right? The women there are really asked to make some pretty huge sacrifices still.
It still is. That one has always been confusing to me. So the woman shaves her head, but she can wear a wig.
She doesn't shave her head. She can just only show.
To cover it.
Yeah, she can only show her hair.
Yeah, but she puts hair on.
Yeah, but
why doesn't she have to put like cabbage leaves on or something? If hair is so erotic, why are you allowed to then wear someone else's hair? To me, that's like if you wear fake boobs.
Why are you trying to insert logic into this?
Yeah. I mean,
why are you trying to think logically?
I mean, Judaism is all about symbolism more than actual things. So it's like its intent is there's all these fences around the law that have been built so people can lead more practical lives and still sort of, shoehorn their way into observance.
Well, I was, in our chapter, I was very busy collecting comments from the beginning of religion because that's when everybody said they were talking to God. So I thought, well, let's just get it straight from the horse's mouth. And apparently God had nothing but contempt for women straight across the board, including Buddhism, the most beloved religion of all. Of
those sweet Buddhists. What did the Buddhist God say that was so bad?
Buddhists said that you can't be enlightened unless you're reborn as a man.
Wow, that's sort of limiting.
Yeah. Well, if you're a woman.
Yeah, if you're a woman, you're not so
You,
bad.
on the other hand, straight on to enlightenment.
Sky's the limit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with that vegan thing.
That's right. As you went through this process, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the process, but one of the things that is fascinating is just all of the stuff, the facts, they're remarkable. So I honestly don't even know where to start with. Like, should I start with the facts or start with how you guys came to this? But it really is a research project, and you learn all this stuff that you've researched along the way as you listen to this.
It was incredibly time consuming, and we really only talk about the most egregious shit. I mean, for every chapter, we're both the kind of verbose person and type A personality where we've compiled hundreds upon hundreds of pages of notes for really only 8 hours worth of material. So, yeah.
And I actually was surprised. I was as surprised. I knew she wasn't going to know the stuff that happened in 400 BC that I was digging up, but I was just as surprised at the stuff that was happening in the 20th and 21st century.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, my generation, I grew up being taught that her generation fixed everything for us, which is definitely not the case.
And I grew up thinking my generation fixed everything, too. It's amazing the amount of times that feminism has rolled backwards in my lifetime, at least twice, the 60s and the 80s.
Well, it's funny you say that because it is the case that feminism became such a high-profile thing, and women's rights and women rejecting sort of what they saw as
the label.
Yeah.
Perish the thought. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the burning the bras and all that stuff. I mean, there was...
just by the way, I have to correct that because I was around for that. Nobody was really burning bras. There was like one person in a publicity stunt burning.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe it was a group of them that all burned bras, but it didn't take off nationwide. It's kind of just one of those things that every newscaster said right before they said, told something about how to beat the heat. One of those kind of reports.
You think that was just nudged in there before how to beat the heat?
Yeah.
And you were literally like at Berkeley in the late 60s, right?
Yeah. I was. No bra burning.
But the point was that there was a pushback during this generation, your generation, kind of to your point. There was a pushback, it seemed, on behalf of feminism. But what you're saying, Megan, is, I mean, in truth, there were no real gains that mattered, or they weren't.
I'm not saying that there were no real gains that mattered, but just the profundity with which things are still, I can say fucked, right?
Yeah.
Fucked was not as clear to me as one would have assumed. I mean, I've been like a feminist my entire life. And so the fact that I didn't know that women couldn't get a credit card without a male cosigner until the 70s. I didn't know this. It's an outrageous shit.
Yeah.
The 70s.
I didn't know that either. That's crazy.
It really is crazy. All this stuff logically makes no sense, except for it's just the way that things were set up. And when you realize that pretty recently things were set up that way, it's not so surprising what we're dealing with now. There's an entrenched layer of anger and restraint meant to be around women. I mean, it's there for thousands of years.
Well, even the civil rights movement, you point this out in your audiobook, the fact that the civil rights movement on behalf of blacks in America was led, I mean, I'm talking about the real gains, were led by women. Mm-hmm. There were men who were part of it, without the clergy who were a big part of it in the South. But the ones who were actually pushing for bigger reforms were all women.
Right, and they didn't get the credit. It's amazing that there's no, that in the civil rights movement, women still aren't equal citizens.
Yeah, what was that thing about they made the women
march in the back?
Right, the women's rights leaders march in the back with the wives.
Yeah.
Well, but the women have been throughout history doing stuff like this. There was the original suffragettes were also abolitionists. They were making a double plank of anti-slavery and pro-vote for women, and the original Christians. Jesus, people surrounding Jesus were women. There were 5 or 6 women who were the big propagators of Christianity, and then got pushed to the side by the guys who came in and decided women were the gateway to Satan.
Right, and painted out by Leonardo.
Yeah, it was apparently women, and I don't know the history of the Christian religion, obviously, but it was apparently women who were the ones who took him down from the cross and who went to look at his grave. It was women, and then got kicked aside.
So take us through some of the other things. I've touched on a couple, and I can keep going. I mean, I haven't heard the entire series, but I heard a good chunk of it. Take us through some of the things that along the way in this universe of surprise just stuck out as particularly surprising.
While I think of something, why don't you discuss flibanserin?
She's obsessed with flibanserin. Okay. Flibanserin is the only medication that's been approved for female libido disorders, as opposed to the 8 metric fuck tons of ones that have been approved for men. And it's not effective. It costs $800 a month, and your insurance won't cover it. And also, if you drink while you're on it, have anything alcoholic at all to drink, so, try and get the mojo going to get laid, you can have a fatally low drop in blood pressure, right? So this is a terrible medication, and it's the only one approved for this particular disorder. But when the manufacturer of this medication found out about the connection between the fatally low drop in blood pressure and alcohol, they did a study that only had men in it, 21 men in it, no women, for a medication specifically for women that could kill them.
That is absolutely crazy.
This is kind of recent. What is this, last year?
It's only a few years ago. And the reason why, or the reason how they got this medication it was approved, is by paying for this splashy PR campaign, guilting the FDA because they had never approved any other medications for female libido disorders.
Was this the supposed female Viagra that they had come up with?
This has been one in a series of. Okay. And there's other medications overseas that are far more effective and less dangerous, but they just haven't been approved here.
Well, Spanish fly, of course.
Yeah. Nothing more effective.
But you're saying that just speaks to, it's a gender bias as opposed to, usually I think when something like that happens, it doesn't make any sense. It's about money. But you're saying it's about...
Big pharma, probably.
Well, women are just excluded from medical trials across the board. And especially, when it comes to things like heart medications, in which, heart disease manifests itself differently in men and women, being a woman can literally kill you,
But then the history of medicine is really crazily anti-women, going back to ancient Greece when the father of medicine and all these people were dominating. They did autopsies on men, but no autopsies on women. And they had it in their head that women were imperfect. There was one sex, it was men, and women were an imperfect version of men and had an internal penis. And it was everything the same, men and women, but the women had an internal penis, which made them even more inferior because they couldn't release semen. The semen instead was traveling in the body, creating toxic fumes, and all the things that went wrong with women had to do with fumes and female semen that was poisoning.
What do you call that? Pink balls? What is that?
Right. Well, as you said in the book, it's because women are so cold that they couldn't generate the heat to make their testicles descend.
And then all these fumes and all this internal semen and stuff caused the uterus to move around the body. They called it the wandering uterus. This is before they'd done any autopsies on women. They only did autopsies on men, horses, and monkeys. They didn't bother doing it on women because that was just an inferior version of men. Why even look?
Well, they're yucky.
They're yucky. So they believed there was this thing, the wandering uterus. It moved all around inside your body, and depending on how you were feeling, your uterus was maybe under your diaphragm. So the way they would treat women at this point in ancient Greece seat of democracy, which I had no idea how awful it was for women. I mean, I was always told it was the seat of beautiful art.
Yeah, it seemed like an enlightened time.
Yeah, it was an enlightened time, and this is how they treated women: is they would put fumes at her mouth and fumes at her vagina, and all these fumes entering her body would cause the uterus to move back into its normal place, and that was pretty much medical treatment for women in ancient Greece.
Well, they were bleeding people also. So, I mean, it's not like they really had their shit together apart from this one. That wasn't like the only blind spot.
Right. No,
okay,
it was not.
Yeah.
They also wouldn't let, from what I read, there were all these different classes of women. There was a prostitute class, and there was something called a heterai, I believe that's how it said, class, and that was a more courtesan. And the women who they married and procreated with were locked in the house with the slaves and weren't allowed to leave. That's wacky. Come on, I had no idea.
There was something else with the slaves. I'm trying to think of what it was.
Oh, well, they got so many slaves, but that wasn't really their problem. It was the women that were the problem. Actors and actresses were a lower class than slaves in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. They were called deplorables.
Well, that wasn't that off.
I mean, it's still applicable, actually.
That's because they made their bodies publicly available. But I mean, I never think of the weird trajectory of actors and actresses since then.
Right.
To
total reverence.
Yeah. From a period of time where they were thought to be beneath your disgust. And then also women were not allowed on stage until the 1600s at all.
Oh, that's right. All the performers were men.
All the performers were men. Who had that idea? That's such a weird idea. Yeah, get the men to play the women. And including for in choirs and so forth, you've got your castrati. You don't want to have the women with the high voices trained to sing when you can just mutilate boys.
Right.
What kind of craziness is that?
That is pretty crazy, Josh.
That went
I'm
to
with
the
you there,
1800s.
Mark.
Wild, wacky stuff.
That is some strange shit.
You know, it's funny, as you go through it, you realize the seeds of total oppression are resown every few hundred years. As you go back to the beginning, I'm thinking of religion and how religion has underscored this to call women second-class citizens might actually imply citizenship.
Yeah, there was no citizenship.
Imply humanity, right.
Yeah.
But Megan had a good point about religion.
Which is why Donald Trump is the president, you mean? Or
well, go ahead with that.
Let's get there.
I'm sure you have many good points, Megan. What's that point?
Donald Trump is the president because white evangelicals are upset that they're no longer the majority, and that's the only reason why he is. And the reason why white evangelical women voted for Donald Trump is because they've been raised their entire life being told that not only are they lesser than their husband, they're lesser than their God, who is also male, and they've internalized this. So they fully believe that they don't deserve equal rights because they're not equal people.
But, you know, the women have not always been the enlightened voices that I want them to be all the way along. Like there was when they were Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were campaigning to get the vote, which took 172 years or something, or maybe it's 72 years. Anyway, it took forever.
Yeah.
When they were doing that, there was a big contingent of women saying, we don't want the vote.
Right.
We don't need the vote. What? We're better off. We don't know how to vote. We're not informed enough to vote.
Same kind of women that didn't want the ERA.
Yeah.
You're right. There was that contingent, but I never really thought of it. It makes perfect sense what you're saying, Megan, but I never really thought of it as sort of being taught, taken in, and then accepted in some sort of unquestioning way to the point that it's not even something you think about anymore.
Well, who are you to question God? I mean, if you've been taught your entire life that your God views you as lesser, you can't. Yeah, I mean, your hands are tied. You know what I mean?
Right.
You'd be a heretic were you to question.
Were you able to, based on this sort of tidal wave of man injustice, was there, when you look at that issue of the Betty Friedan's of the world and stuff, I mean, does it make you angry, or is it just like at that point it's Stockholm syndrome,
Does it make me angry that these women have internalized misogyny so much that they hate themselves? Or
well, does it make you angry that the women who
She's internalized it, so she accepts it.
Is there a hostility towards the women who didn't speak earlier in the arc of history?
Right.
There were people. There was always contingents of people all the way through. We didn't focus on them because there's really a lot of books out that are about the exceptional person through history.
Right.
This was what history was, and so we didn't trace the origin of. There was a woman emperor in 1100, and she did such and such, because there were in pockets groups of enlightened people fighting the way they do.
But like feeling hostility for the kind of women that you're talking about, it's like victim blaming or something, or victim shaming.
Right.
You know, they know not what they do.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but I mean, yeah, you can't.
No, and I'm not suggesting you should, but
yeah.
you know, I'm curious if in the wave of all of this you start going, well, why didn't these fucking people, you know,
right?
If
and I
you
mean,
start getting that stupid,
although Betty Friedan was kind of weird,
the stupid Kanye argument of, you know, they could have, you know,
yeah, you could have
seems
just
like 400 years is a
kill
long
your
time.
owner.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the stuff you pointed out about Betty Friedan attacking lesbians was kind of pointless.
Yeah.
What was that stuff?
Yeah, there was stuff in your book about Betty
Yeah,
Friedan.
Betty Friedan hated lesbians. Yeah, sure. I mean,
She thought what did she call them?
the Lavender Menace.
Right.
Right. It's so yeah. There's the complete picture on anybody begins to reveal so much. The religion stuff really stuck out because it obviously had a cultural dominance across so many different countries, as you say, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean,
it's everywhere. I think the Wiccans maybe are not woman haters, but I didn't look into it.
it was the way to live as laid down, as you say, when your God is explained to you a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
It's and enlightenment about that, or falling off the religious wagon, that does seem like a fairly recent thing. And so my point is, pushback against it then becomes a more recent thing.
The level of pushback with more information behind it, I think, has changed. Like just the fact that the current women's movement isn't anti-lesbian. But, you know, when I moved to L.A. and right around 80, the cusp of the 70s, 80s, there were no lesbians in the world. You had to go look for them under rocks and stuff. They were banned from common society. We all knew that Paul Lynde, the Center Square on Hollywood Squares, was a gay man, and there were certain gay men in Hollywood. We knew that a little bit. But we didn't even really know that Rock Hudson was a gay man at that point, and there were no gay women. It took a lot of years before there was any discussion of gay women at all.
Yeah, that's another thing that's pretty amazing. Like that moved at Mach speed, the awareness about the gay community, and then high profile gays and lesbians coming out. That now that you've mentioned it, I think, wow, that really did just blow up. So you have Ellen, and like I'm talking about.
Well, Ellen was a big moment.
Right.
That was a really big moment.
Right.
That was very brave of her now that you look back on it, especially what you come out of. I mean, that when you look through history trying to find stuff to piece together for this book, you find out that there are no female voices in history until the 1600s. The early history is written entirely by men. And it wasn't actually that women couldn't write. They just got rid of it all. They threw it out, including women like Sappho, the Isle of Lesbos woman that they always tout in ancient Greece. They got rid of all her work. It's hard to find her work, apparently. If you look up on Wikipedia, which is not where we did our research, but I always checked in to see what they had.
Page, yeah.
They would always say at the top, there are no voices on women's sexuality in ancient Greece because it was written entirely by men. And you go, whoa, really? Didn't occur to me, really.
They did across cultures, though, they didn't educate women much of the time. Isn't that the case?
They didn't. There was, including, I have a quote.
And that's also a trend that continued until, the 60s, in which women only went to college in order to find husbands.
When I was in college, they used to say, are you getting your MRS degree? Which,
God, that's unreal.
which didn't apply to me. I was a nasty little art student. Anyway,
what are you looking?
Yeah, I was looking for Rousseau. Rousseau. This was the age of Enlightenment, and they used to have salons where they would talk about whether or not women had souls and whether or not you could educate them. I mean, this is the late 1800s. That seems like yesterday to me. When you start looking into 5000 BC, the late 1800s is around the corner, and it was. At that point, they were still going, well, no, you really shouldn't educate them more. And they'd make arguments for it. Like them, like they are not part of the human race. The fact that the human race decided to split itself into segments where one was the person who ran everything and the other was discounted is very weird. Why did they do that?
Well, but then also talking about how, 1800s wasn't that long ago. I mean, while things are still ineffably fucked now, the amount of progress that we've made in such a short amount of time is nothing less than staggering.
Well, that's
given
the thing. I mean,
thousands of years of,
There's like no progress in Merrill's half of the book.
Yeah. This is Rousseau. Rousseau said, part of the Age of Enlightenment. He's known for being one of the most enlightened. The education of women ought to be relative to men, to please them, to be useful to them, to make themselves loved and honored by them, to educate them when young, to care for them when grown, to counsel them, to console them, and to make life agreeable and sweet to them. These are the duties of women at all times and should be taught to them from their infancy. This was the 1800s. So when you actually, it's kind of explains a lot when you realize that in the Age of Enlightenment, that's what a very enlightened philosopher said. Cut to, our friend Mr. Trump yelling at a reporter today and going, yeah, you don't think, no, I'm not surprised. It's kind of a straight line.
Well, look, that misogynist view exists and probably exists in a bigger way in the older generation and also in the entitled. And he comes from a world of entitlement.
Well, and it disguises itself as total dismissiveness, too, rather than contempt,
In his case, it's class, too. Yeah. It's class and race-oriented. It has a lot of opponents.
And, you mentioned class and race, and it's hard to see all this stuff about gender through time without going into the fact that, the people who set up the culture are guys. This patriarchy has set it up so that rich and powerful men are going to be in control of everything, and they've essentially established legal systems and religious laws to go alongside them that back all that up. I mean, that's really what's happened through time.
And then you turn on TV and you look at the Kavanaugh hearings and you look at at least we've now got a couple of women on the Judicial Committee.
That's right.
It used to be when Anita Hill testified, it was how many men?
There's still no women on the Republican side of the aisle.
Right. No.
It isn't a surprise because, again, it's the growing pains of a system set up by guys who were generally white and powerful, right? Mm-hmm. White and moneyed. And so you end up with a system that reflects that slowly. As I say, they're growing pains. You let women in, you let people of different faiths in, you let those of humbler roots in. I mean, when I say they're let in, I mean the system begins to accommodate, but it's still primarily, as you say, if you look at that judiciary hearing, if you look at Congress, I mean, it's a place where increasingly the moneyed aristocracy will get their way.
Yeah, the thing that gives me hope is that it's not necessarily in the human male DNA, because before there were these societies that are the predecessors of our own, there were 8 million years of hunter-gatherers. That's a lot of years, 8 million years. And those societies, which were smaller, were more egalitarian. They didn't have it all separated out and weren't tracing things through the mother or the father. They were just small groups. So that makes me hopeful that it's maybe not in the DNA, it's in the bad system.
Yeah, the women in the hunter-gatherer societies, they
did a
were
lot of stuff. They were doing a lot, if we can believe their paintings. It's prehistory. But it was 8 million years of this. When you think about it, that's a lot of millions of years. It's way more millions of years than we've had since. We're only by this calendar, we're on 2000 and change.
Well, as men's egos got more challenged with economic strata and things over the years, they started having to get more protective.
Yeah, this is all just because they feel threatened. I mean,
I tend to agree.
Yeah, that does seem to be
so they're throwing a tantrum.
You even talk about the modern laws regarding women and the vote, Equal Rights Amendment, the fact that
why wouldn't that pass?
Exactly. Explain that, because it may come as a shock to many.
Oh, explain the existence of the Equal Rights Amendment?
And where it stands.
Oh, well, it's just in permanent stasis, basically. It was introduced every year since, I think, 1920. Almost got ratified in the 70s, didn't. And then, the women's argument against it, like Phyllis... How do you pronounce her last name? Schlafly, which is like the biggest proponent against it. The argument was that if you put in the law that women have equal rights to men, then basically that's going to be the death knell of chivalry. Right. And the men will no longer be obligated to open doors for you. I mean, I don't know.
Phyllis Schlafly was who I was thinking of more than Betty Friedan earlier.
Yeah, Phyllis Schlafly was there's nothing worse than gender traitor, man. It's kind of, I just said that we shouldn't hate them, but now I'm thinking, now I'm pivoting back to hating.
You buy the special place in hell argument?
Yes. Yeah, she's probably going to drink a cold one with Kellyanne Conway or something.
But anyway, so it never got formally...
No, it's never been... So
but it was ratified by 30-ish states out of the necessary...
35 out of 38, I believe it was, yeah. But never... The trigger was never pulled, and no one seems to give a fuck.
It's just sort of amazing, really, that when this country started, and you hear all men are created equal, you don't realize that they were only talking about men.
Yeah.
Right.
The women didn't have the vote for 72 years.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is blasphemous to some, but we talk about the founding fathers with this reverence that, in my judgment, is completely misplaced. I don't take away from the fact that these are very smart guys. They did a very difficult thing.
While owning people.
Yeah. they had a worldview that was despicable.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. They own people.
It's like when Trump said the other day, it's like George Washington couldn't get confirmed. I'm like, no, I do think that the slave owning would be a problem for him if he came up in modern day times.
Yeah.
I really think that might get him off.
It might throw a spanner in the works, to be sure, yeah.
What are some of the other quotes of famous people that expose the weirdness of the time when it came to
Aristotle said, "The female is, as it were, a mutilated male, more apt to scold and to strike, more void of shame or self-respect, more false of speech, more deceptive, more difficult to rouse to action, more prone to despondency and less hopeful." Like, what would make them so unhopeful in his view, would you think?
They'd look so much prettier if they smiled, too. I don't know why they're so dour.
Well, and I think there's this thing of like, I mean, talking about the fear that men have of women is that women have, in a lot of cases, the unique power to humiliate men.
Right. Like men don't have that unique power to, men have managed to, on their side of it, just kill women.
No, I'm not. It's not a defense of men. It's an attack of men. It is saying that it is such a weakness to go, this person could hurt me and therefore I have to keep them down.
Right. Right.
Because she can hurt me in a way. I can't go have a duel with her if she insults my dick.
Yeah, I can't put a Band-Aid on my ego.
If someone else insults my honor, I can have a public duel with him, or but a woman can hurt me in a way that a man can't, and this self-protection thing comes up, and I think it became institutionalized as a protective wall in that way too.
Mm-hmm.
When you guys began this collaboration, you know each other through social media.
We do.
And then why this? I mean, it's a great, juicy subject. I'm just wondering how it came into your world.
I mean, we've been working on it so long. How long have we been working on it? That it, predated all this Me Too stuff. I mean, it was really a knee-jerk reaction to the election of Donald Trump.
Yeah, it was about Trump, and also we both went on the Women's March, and that was really very inspiring. That was the first concrete activism I'd taken. I was very big on activism when I was at Berkeley. I was in a lot of anti-Vietnam kind of protests and so forth. And then I kind of laid out and I was an artist at the time, and then I went into comedy, and then I was kind of paying only half attention to things. I wasn't really politically active until Trump, and then suddenly there I was on the streets again, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. I had forgotten how much rage I have in me for this stuff. That's why we thought of this. We were actually pitching podcast ideas, and we were throwing out different things because you have to have a hook of some kind, obviously.
That's our problem, Josh. We don't have a hook.
No, I don't have one with Kindler either.
And I know, well, at least you got Kindler.
Hook is Kindler, yeah.
Kindler is all hook, though.
Yeah, that's true.
No line, though.
Anyway, so you're looking for something, and you found...
I was most interested in, right after Trump became elected, everyone I know was asking, how did this happen? Yeah, I feel like I was the only person, at least in my peer group, who was relatively unsurprised. Well, how did it happen? It's because misogyny still exists. That's how it fucking happened. And then I was wondering, where did misogyny start? Right.
Let me just stop you there.
I think racism was at the intersection too of the Trump decision.
Right.
There was more. It was more than just misogyny, certainly. But it is interesting you mention misogyny, because if you put in, and this is tough to do without a specific person in mind, but if you put a man in that spot instead of Hillary Clinton, you're saying Donald Trump doesn't get anywhere near the White House.
I'm actually not saying that. He is, I think he's a moron, but he's really brilliant at crowd control. Speaking as someone who has done stand-up comedy on and off for decades, that guy really knows how to control a crowd. I mean, it has to be his crowd, but when it's his crowd, he gets them chanting. He gets them captivated, and I think he would. And then he went for the gutter right away. He quickly took over those Republican debates by talking about dicks.
Yeah,
right. By bringing everyone down to that level, that bully level, and soon they all had to fight at that level.
Yeah, you're right.
Hillary is also just such a polarizing figure, especially amongst Democrats. I feel like, people that voted third party or people who didn't vote at all, if they had an option that wasn't Hillary Clinton, would have come out in larger numbers just
I do think
to
so,
defeat
too.
Trump.
I think the 25 years of Hillary poisoning made a difference here. I even think that there could have been another woman who could have beat Trump, but I think the antipathy towards Hillary was so pervasive and so just complete bedrock for some people in terms of how they felt about her that it couldn't change.
Yeah, she is just a binary polarizing person. You love her or you hate her.
Just a fun quote from 200 AD, somebody named Tertullian, who was the father of Latin Christianity and the founder of Western theology. Good credits for your IMDb.
Sure.
And he said, "And do you not know that you are each an Eve? You are the devil's gateway. Woman is a temple built over a sewer." Which sounds like a blues song to me, doesn't it? Women is a temple.
I hate it when an insult starts as a compliment. You're a temple built over a sewer.
Maybe he was the original negger. You know how guys neg women with the compliment that goes into a insult?
Yeah.
Oh.
You'd be pretty if you smile, that one?
Mm-hmm. That wouldn't be so
You're
popular
smart
now,
for a
would
chick.
it? Yeah, that wouldn't really be so popular now, would it? That guy, you remember that guy with the rock star clothes? What was his name? Monster or
Mystery?
Mystery.
Are you thinking Mystery the pickup artist? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That it was called the whole system.
The pickup artist.
Yeah, the pickup artist, but the system was called something
it was
like
the game.
The Game, right?
Yeah.
We had him on the show. Not the guy who invented the game, but
Neil Strauss.
Neil Strauss, yeah. He's a smart guy.
He was actually a writer before, but Mystery is a figurehead. He's a guy who wanted to be a rock star, but forgot to learn an instrument. Damn, he was so close.
Yeah, but he still got
the clothes.
Actually, he's smarter because he didn't have to expend effort on learning an instrument, but he still got pussy.
Yeah.
So maybe he's smarter than
That's right.
everyone on the
Every
rock
rock
star.
star.
It's a lot easier to go to fly without having an instrument.
Oh, what was I going to say? But something about you were just saying. I don't know. It was about the politics of the Clinton thing. Anyway, whatever.
Well, actually, Hillary alienated some people. Like I, at one point, was angry at Hillary that she didn't leave Bill when all that stuff came out about Bill. Bill, a hard guy to love.
Right.
I mean, his politics I liked, but
he was a middle of the politically. I don't know. We can get into that middle of the road or a little bit, but I hear what you're saying. But let me just ask you:
the rape there didn't get the attention that it deserved.
Right.
It was always floating around there like the Cosby rapes were.
Right.
Yeah.
Until somebody put a little spotlight on it.
And the rape is not the Lewinsky thing.
No.
No,
it was,
exactly.
Juanita Broderick and
There were a bunch. There was a list of names.
Right.
which
Just to
Steve
be clear
Bannon
about
was nice enough to show up at a debate with.
So Hillary playing along with that didn't look too flattering to Hillary at that point.
I mean, she had a bigger goal, it would seem. She had a
Right.
political aspiration, and I think that this is my guess, that, it was best served by, she decided. She did
That's the cynical view, There is also a view of people go, yeah, marriage is fucking hard, and you get through these things eventually,
There's always the thing of the wife is the last to know. I mean, I've been in relationships like that where you just don't know. Everyone else knows. And later when you find out, you wonder, well, so did you all know and you didn't say anything? Did you think I was an idiot?
Denial's a powerful thing in bad relationships, it seems.
Yeah.
No, that's true. Look, listen, Camille Cosby didn't exactly, in my view, Camille Cosby had to know. Are you kidding me? How could you not know?
You say that, but, or else the other thing
You
that
don't
people
want it.
say about women
This
is
how
they
you
go,
don't know. You put blinders on and go, la,
No,
la, la, la,
I was really
la,
getting
la.
to that. Again, I agree. I think she probably didn't know up until there was a point, it was probably in the last 10 years where she might have had
maybe he
word
confessed to one and then said, I would never do that again. It's all the crazy people who write in and all the crazy people who are after me in show business. You know how crazy they are. And,
Or he just deny, like Trump does. That's
or like Richard
He's
Pryor
being
said,
persecuted.
who are you going to believe, me or your lion eyes?
Yeah. This is one of the things, though, the relationships between men and women, even the smart, elevated, broad-thinking men and women, liberal-minded men and women, they are still things that have to find their way, and they're fraught with all kinds of different perspectives depending on who the people are in the relationship, I guess what I'm saying. And then when you extend that out into these different cultural things, which is kind of what your audiobook talks about, you see that. You see how effed up we are, like when you get us all in one big cultural room.
We're a terrible animal.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I both really love animals, and I am aware that nature is cruel and that there's a lot of eating of your mother. among some species or your child, but not so much herding lots and lots of people into a camp and then torturing them. That's really the human being.
No,
there doesn't seem to be sadism in nature.
No, thank you.
Just pure cruelty.
Thank you. That's the best way to put it. No, really, nature is cruel, but Josh said it perfectly. There isn't sadism. There's no sense of vengefulness.
Yeah.
But I've said it for years. People are shit. Men are the shittiest. And then women, though, and this is the inappropriate time to say it, but women, unfortunately, still fall into the category of people as a whole.
Mm-hmm. There's plenty of awful women. There's no question about it, but they don't deserve to be treated as non-citizens.
No.
I believe men and women should be hated equally.
Thank you. Very.
And we'll get there someday.
That's my feminism.
Someday we will get there.
That's the tea towel that we're going to merchandise. We're going to be selling that.
I love that, actually. I will. I'll buy one. Look, it's excruciating, this patriarchy. And as you say now, in this time, the post-Trumpian election time, it's just so clear. It's so naked. It's so unapologetically there.
Mm-hmm. All the women I know wake up in the morning and feel like a truck just ran over you. Ever soon when you get hit consciousness and you realize you're back there again.
My wife has been a wreck since the hearings have started.
Yeah, the hearing, I really went into some kind of fugue state during the hearing. I could hardly see straight. I couldn't work.
It is Triggerville for a lot of people.
Seriously?
I mean, these guys are just quadrupling down because they feel incredibly it's the same reason why they're all xenophobic. But hey, there's good news, kids. They're going to fucking die in like 20 years max. So let's just ride this out, wait for him to die, and then everybody can be Polly or whatever.
Yeah, but Kavanaugh won't be that old in 20 years.
I'm just, I'm trying. Can I look on the bright side for once?
Cheryl Houghton, who she was one of the co-creators of Numbers, she just tweeted the other day that one of the nice things about being in my 60s is that a lot of the men who harassed me in the 80s are dead now.
It is true, though. But you see these guys who are, the Chuck Grassleys of the world, or
that guy. Goodbye.
But Lindsey Graham is not old enough for my taste. I mean,
he's not.
He's horrible.
He is horrible.
But I don't think he's vegan. You don't. I mean, he might be going to Old Country Buffet every day. You don't know what his lifestyle's like. He might.
He might kick off early.
That's
your point.
What I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, all of his big pharma friends can, keep him in Lipitor and other stuff that's life extension, for a long time.
Salient point.
When you look at all of the different chapters, I don't have them in front of me, but I can have them in front of me. You have
inequality, sex, hair.
Yeah, we have something.
Vanity.
We have one on the pursuit of vanity because it's kind of interesting. I mean, that was one of my original thoughts before I realized how we were going to focus this book. I was thinking I've just always been really terrible at being a woman. I've just always been awful at it. I'm really bad at walking in 3-inch heels, and I don't get any better at it as I get older. I'm bad at makeup. I put it on, and then I look at myself at an event thinking I look pretty good, and I realize it's all moved to some other spot on my face, and I'm a big smear. And then you find out what the history of this stuff is, and it was even worse. The makeup used to be full of lead, and the women were dropping dead from lead poisoning, and this stuff that they used in lipstick, which was full of mercury, and this stuff they would put in their eyes to make their eyes look sort of watery.
Languid.
Which was belladonna. It was causing blindness. I mean, they're
fucking poison. You're putting poison in their eyes.
And then Megan pointed out in our thing, what was the stuff about the FDA ruling?
There's very little oversight when it comes to the FDA and on what is in cosmetics in America specifically, in Europe and in England and whatnot. There are many things that are restricted to be put in cosmetics, but in America, there's only maybe 11 things.
Yeah, there were 11
in a cosmetic, which is
and they were
insane.
They don't mention what the 11. Yeah, it's basically that vomit.
We do that in this country, now more and more we're going to be doing it with everything from pesticides to
deregulate,
food.
Baby. Hell yeah.
So you can put in whatever you want.
Yeah.
Crime. One of your chapters is crime.
Well, I talk
if
about
only they could control themselves.
Historically speaking, one of the first things that's interesting is that in, I believe it's 3500 BC, there was a guy named Arukagina. He was a king, and he immediately made the first gender-specific crime, which was adultery. Only women could be adulterers. Men, sky's the limit, not a problem for men. So any woman adulterer, you're already a criminal. it was only women. That's a wacky idea.
Yeah, that's and that's been carried over into, what is it called, Josh? The mercy killing? What is it?
You mean the Sharia stuff?
Honor killing.
Honor killing. Thank you. Yeah. The honor killings are a flavor of that, aren't they?
Thanks for making me the misogyny glossary.
Josh knows everything about everything. That's why I always turn to him for that stuff. But in other words, that's just a flavor of that, isn't it? This culture, those women being raped makes them guilty, and as a result, they're going to die.
Which goes back to what I'm saying about men's fear of being humiliated by women.
And which I guess extends forward into on the topic of women being criminals. You know, I was not aware of the amount of women that were being burned as witches. I know about the Salem witch trials. We've all seen the Crucible. I thought, all right, so, 25 women in Salem. There was kind of it's like the McMartin School or whatever.
Bad day at Black Rock.
Did you know in a 10-year period in the Middle Ages, there were 60,000 women burned as witches? 60,000. And then overall, in a century, it was 200,000 women burned as witches.
Wow.
For nothing.
And only 50,000 of them were.
Yeah, exactly.
How did they determine witches, you may ask? Well, it was stuff like birthmarks.
Floating.
And being mouthy and having the wrong color eyes. Or if you were living single and not unhappy with it, that was burned as a witch. It was a wide variety of things I would have been burned for. All I could keep thinking of is, I could have been reborn repeatedly over that century and would have been kept being burned over and over.
It's like that Tom Cruise movie where he keeps dying and being reborn.
What about Joan of Arc? Wasn't she
burned?
That's what made me think of it, because she was burned, honestly.
I had never figured out what the deal is on Joan of Arc. I didn't do any particular research into her, but she was hearing voices. That's got to be schizophrenia, no?
Well, yeah, that's something. But the thing about
I know it's God and schizophrenia.
Right. If it weren't God, it would be some kind of mental disorder. But here was the amazing thing about Joan of Arc. And again, I don't know, so Josh, please correct me. Joan of Arc was a teenager. She was just she might have been 14 to 16, somewhere in there, right?
No wonder they followed her into battle. She's hearing voices. She's 14. Let's go.
She had to prevail upon the leaders of an entire army, right? It was the king, I think, who she ultimately had to prevail upon.
And they went with it.
And they went with it. I mean, it was an amazing chapter.
She was not that bad, I guess. She was an okay leader.
No, and this is the other thing, and then I don't know, we get off on this jag, but the other thing about her was, she offered strategy. She was a military strategist in this weird way. She didn't know anything about, what could she possibly know? But she was a soldier and suggested military strategy that they then followed and executed and then won. Yeah. So until they burned her. But
she made a critical mistake after that. It's like
that she aged over 14. That's all of our mistakes, yeah.
So that's the history of it. Well, then there were the early women's prisons. Those were vile.
Yeah, not as fun as, Orange is the New Black.
No.
I can't remember what your part of the crime stuff was about. Do you remember?
I mostly just talk about the sort of crimes that occur to women and how women prisoners are treated. Spoiler alert, not well.
Yeah. Yeah, how about that?
Yeah,
there has to be abuse on a level that we could never even conceive in those prisons. You talk about entertainment in your audiobook. How does that relate to the female experience?
Well, I didn't know that the film industry was actually remarkably egalitarian at the beginning of it. At the beginning of the film industry, it was about 40% female, and it's just over time women have been sort of erased.
Is that right?
Yeah, The first film editor was a woman. The first person who directed a narrative, like a film with a plot, was a woman. Yeah, it was remarkably egalitarian at the beginning, and then just sort of went to shit. There's two things that made it go to shit. It was the rise of sort of teen movies and only trying to appeal to the male teen demographic. And then also the rise of auteurs, which are all male, basically. Right. Again, not to use Wikipedia as a source, but it is it reflects society. And if you go to the Wikipedia page for, New Hollywood, that movement, there's only one woman on a list of 60 dudes, and it's Elaine May, who most people don't think of as a fucking director.
Right.
So I always assumed that the film industry was just misogynistic from jump, but
don't forget what we talked about before. There were no women allowed on stage until 1600. That is so crazy.
Well, which is why it surprises me that the film industry was more open to women in the early days.
Right.
Because especially now, when you look at how it's devolved into this place where, I mean, I understand we're going through Me Too and all the rest, but if you look at directors, you look at Oscar
numerically,
nominees.
the amount of women who are in the business, especially in positions of power like directing or cinematography, it's insane. Insanely low.
And the spirit of that new Hollywood that came out of when the studio system died, and it was such a macho kind of.
Yeah, exactly. It's hyper masculine.
It was hyper masculine, and it was. I mean, much like the sexual revolution, it wasn't about the women.
Right,
free
exactly.
love was still completely one sided, and that spirit pervaded into art as well. I think.
Yeah.
Well, when I first started researching this book, lots of stuff didn't occur to me. Like when I was in art school and we learned exclusively about male artists, I thought, well, that's who the artists were. That's the art that moved through time. I didn't realize women were being systematically removed from that list, and that, in fact, during the Renaissance, there were all kinds of great women painters who were sort of surfacing now, being brought back to life, but they were just removed from visibility. They were not recorded as history.
Yeah, that's a remarkable thing that you don't think about. Because when you can tour the Louvre and you can tour the great museums of Europe and in this country, take in all this art of the time, considered the greatest art of all time, or certainly of that epoch, and you end up with all men.
Yeah, you forget because most of the pictures are of women.
So women are involved somehow.
No, and it's wild. I mean, until Merrill mentioned that, I thought, wow, here's the effed up thing. Certainly what Merrill's just said, which is that they got rid of all the evidence, in effect, of women as artists. That's super effed up. But here's another effed up thing, that I've been to all of these museums, and it never even occurred to me, hey, where's, Mary Ann Bennett's picture? You know what I mean? Didn't she do some great art in the 1600s? It's amazing. We become so used to it, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you don't think about it at all.
Yeah.
Just even on a weirder note of women in entertainment, this is during your lifetime, or at least it's during my lifetime. I don't know what year you were born. But when I first moved to L.A., there were no women in radio. Women were not allowed to be in radio. It was boilerplate philosophy that the female voice was unlistenable, that it had to be those male voices that we all heard in radio. There were zero women.
You're saying when you first moved here, that was the case?
That was what was said commonly.
You know what's so odd about
once
that?
Head Hopper went off the air or whatever. It's like,
But I was thinking Tokyo Rose and all the, I mean, really, when you want to connect with men, who do you get female voices often to do it?
Well, think about early talk radio. Entirely men.
Right.
It was really, I guess it would be the 90s when women started being in talk radio, and even then it's a minority.
even Phil Henry doing women, he couldn't have a woman on the show.
Well, women in talk radio, I want to say, were therapists often. And
That was the 90s, though, wasn't it?
No, that was the 80s.
80s, you're right.
Yeah.
There was Dr.
80s,
Tony Grant.
Dr. Tony Grant and a bunch of others.
Dr. Laura.
It is interesting, though, how misogyny trumps desire for money for a lot of these people in the entertainment. You would assume that someone, take, for example, film, right? So the argument that's always made against having female protagonists or having women make films is that the target demographic is male, women don't go to the movies on their own, et cetera, et cetera. But that simply isn't true. Women are 51% of the film going public. Films that have female protagonists actually make more money, more of a return on their investment than male.
Right.
So this argument is fundamentally, it's flawed on its core. The only reason, if you made more films with female protagonists, you would make more money. The only reason why you're not doing it is because you hate women.
Well, and it was based on the fact that women are going to movies on dates.
Right.
Women will go with a man to their movie, but a man won't go with a woman to their movie.
Yeah, there was some
Right.
study where they discovered that.
And that's not true anymore.
And now women will go to movies.
Yeah.
It's not a man-dependent activity necessarily, too.
Exactly. So, yeah, that argument that is still being used is no longer...
And growing up, for me, I mean, the biggest TV star, Lucy to Carol Burnett to Laverne and Shirley, there was always huge female TV stars, and yet...
Women were really not
writing
allowed
it.
in stand-up when I first started. There were a few. But
are you implying that they're allowed now?
They're barely allowed now, but there are a ton of them, a ton of great ones. There were just a few when I started, and my friend Elaine Boozler.
They just did a big write-up on
I saw
her
that.
New York
which is
Times.
great.
Yeah. But, she was very prominent in the underground stand-up world at the time. Carson wouldn't let her on the show. They found her, the word they used to use about her was threatening.
Right.
Threatening. She's like 5'1". She would get really dressed up and do her hair and put on makeup, and she had great jokes.
Oh, she was terrific.
She wasn't demure though. She was.
Yeah, she was aggressive.
And she wasn't self-deprecating.
Exactly.
She was aggressive.
Yeah.
And they called that threatening, and that was my lifetime. That's so weird.
Carson's just a
Well, I have to say
dipshit.
from my lifetime, and I need to do a little bit of Merrill Markoe gushing right now, because like when I was 13, if I could name 3 comedy writers, Merrill Markoe would have been one of them.
Not all 3?
Not all 3. But it would have been maybe Gerard Mulligan and Chris Elliott, but I mean, I can't understate how important Late Night was, how influential that show was.
Yeah, too bad I wasn't aware of it at the time.
But it truly was. And I want to thank you, but I also want to just highlight that fact that, modern late night talk shows are descended from your show, not from Carson.
Right,
exactly.
I never liked the Carson show. I'm the only person willing to go on record saying that. Everybody else just idolizes and worships him.
And
But for me, he was really misogynist.
Yeah.
For sure. And you watch him. I've been watching a lot of them lately because they're replaying him on like Antenna TV, and he's incredibly misogynist.
Hateful.
The reason, of course, I agree with that. The reason that I'm somehow transfixed by him is because I grew up with him.
Yeah,
it's not. It's bizarre. It's a little like you just get used to it.
And you had no alternative.
Right.
This is when there was
it's
fucking
where
channels.
I learned
and
to
you
be.
weren't also thinking about gender. You were just watching him. Like Letterman used to say to me, he's your cool uncle that you wish you could hang out with. And I would look at him and I would think, no, he's a guy that I would meet and he would not talk to me because I wouldn't be the right kind of person.
Right.
I just couldn't imagine him wanting to talk to me because I didn't look right. I wouldn't be playing the flirtatious card.
Right.
I would have some kind of content I wanted to talk about, or I'd want to make jokes with him and he wouldn't. I would be leading with my tits.
Right. But back then there weren't any other shows on, essentially, that late at night. You felt when you're a little kid.
There was Cavett at one point.
There was Cavett at one point, and Cavett was good. Cavett had some
it
great
was a whole
stuff.
different approach.
Much headier, much,
He didn't last that long, though. Carson was in perpetuity.
Right.
Yeah. It felt like more zany stuff might happen on the Carson show. More fun stuff would happen. Stars coming in and being a bit irreverent. I mean,
but it was all incredibly reverent of show business.
Yes.
And people, it was all under this very old Hollywood kind of banner.
And then the
feeling.
only women they had
negativity.
on were women who would show a lot of cleavage and would flirt with him.
Right.
They didn't have any women. I was watching that show for a while looking for someone that looked like a friend that I would want to know. And really the closest you would get to it was Terry Garr, who did actually become a friend of mine. But she could play the dumb broad, and that's why she was there.
Yeah, but they would parade them out to Johnny almost.
Right.
It was, and
he would hit on them all.
So
I heard.
When you guys brought, I mean, I know a lot of it was born out of restrictions that you couldn't do a straight monologue because Johnny did that, and I know know.
Yeah,
but
which
I'm totally turned on by. I think that those can make some of the best creative things when you have restrictions.
Right,
They make you make better and more interesting
that
choices.
was a funny thing to me. They gave us restrictions which were that you couldn't have a sidekick sit down with him, and you couldn't have a monologue, and you couldn't play Stump the Band. And then I remember thinking, oh no, that just leaves everything in the world.
Right.
The whole world is open.
Right. And it was a hugely influential show. And I remember when I started doing stand up when I was 15, and soon after Joel Hodgson, who had gone into retirement,
who was so funny on that show.
Yeah, and I used to watch him on Letterman and SNL, but he was a Minneapolis guy where I was from, and so like 6 months after I started doing stand up at 15, he came out of retirement. And he started teaching this sort of creativity class.
What was he doing in retirement? Wasn't he like 38 years old?
No, he was like 23 when he was on Letterman and stuff. And he was like, he got freaked out by Hollywood.
Oh.
He was like, they offered him a sitcom. He's like, no, but it's bad. And they're like, okay, well, we'll give you twice as much money. And so he just kind of freaked out and went back to Minneapolis to live the more bohemian Minneapolis arty life, which he enjoyed so much. And then he came out, but when he was teaching this creativity class that I took, and that he made us not watch Letterman for the 8 weeks of the class because he felt like it had imposed such an influence on everyone's stand up, and he felt like everyone was just doing Letterman, essentially.
Right.
And I think that's really true. And I think even when we started Mystery Science Theater, that deconstructive thing that you brought to television, that meta thing that I feel like started there in so many ways, pervaded into our thing in 1988. I think
it was different. It was pretty different.
Very different, but the ethos, I'm thanking you for the ethos, essentially, because I think it was hugely influential for what came after.
Well, we were deconstructing everything, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, that was the great thing that you guys had, and I think that I kind of make the connection after Josh has mentioned it, is that you sort of didn't have a reverence for show business, and for, at least you represented on that show,
sort of the opposite of that.
The opposite. And that's what your show was, Mystery Science. You guys are sitting there wisecracking through that's the essence of the show.
Yeah, it's poking holes in what was before was just sort of a given.
Right.
You also have to realize that, before the TV, before we came on, which was the TV of the 70s, was so ridiculously hacky and corny and left over from vaudeville. It was very vaudevillian in its essence, especially the variety shows.
And it's just at that moment where TV had been around long enough so that people could recognize conventions. They could recognize what hacky was, sort of, in their way,
I remember watching the first Saturday Night Live and seeing them do a really excellent parody of a commercial. And before that, the only thing you'd seen would be Lucy doing a commercial, and it would look nothing like a commercial.
Right.
You'd understand it was supposed to be one, but it would be Lucy mugging, and it didn't remind you of a commercial.
Or Art Fern going, go to the Slauson cutoff and cut off your Slauson.
Yeah. And they did that on Saturday Night Live. I remember being really excited about that. Like, wow, we can do that now.
Right.
Yeah, that actually jumped out of Saturday Night Live from the sketch comedy, that they did these commercial satires or whatever you'd call those. My mother turned me on to SNL in season 1. She said, I'm watching the show. It's kind of funny. You should see it.
Did you see the thing this week of Kavanaugh?
Oh, it was brilliant.
It was really good.
Yeah, really brilliant. Well, I love having you guys in. I don't want to leave anything out. I feel
you were very thorough.
I hope so. I really enjoyed it. It's a shame.
The chapter where we hold you responsible for the decline of the culture. Did you get to that one?
I'm glad I haven't gotten to that yet.
I do want to ask just about the creative process of the book itself. Listening to it, it definitely has a sort of serialized podcast kind of feel, which you were saying earlier. Before we started, that was kind of the initial pitch, was a podcast. Because it's clear that some of it was written as to be a book, like written prose.
It's got a formula. Every single one is a written piece by me and a written piece by Megan, and we researched those things like crazy. We spent weeks on them, writing and writing and writing, and then we decided that we would talk to each other in between and discuss.
To sort of, break up the monotone nature of just our voices talking.
So it makes for an interesting format, I think, because it, it isn't just a straight audiobook being read by the author. There is some pauses from that,
and it has music,
some lightly scripted
by Andy Priebo,
yeah, the music's actually really good, and
good, he's going to be very happy you said that.
It's true, and it's not just the same theme for every chapter. Like the music, the lyrics relate to the chapters.
Yeah, he wrote a different verse of putting the laundry away for every chapter.
Yeah,
and he had many more that we didn't get to. Once he got on it, he was on it. He's actually putting out a version of that as a single, but he's changed it now to Pissing My Money Away.
Well, where can everybody listen to it? The best way to hear it?
You can actually do a pretend trial on Audible and hear it free.
Ah.
Yeah, it's their free 30-day trial. I'm sure we don't get...
They're not going to like that we said that.
Yeah. Well, if you're
you
not
can buy
on Audible,
it on Audible.
Yeah, it's on Audible.
You ought to get on Audible. There's some good stuff on Audible. But Merrill Markoe and Megan Koester, it is the Indignities of Being a Woman.
It is.
Mm.
And this is the beginning. I see more for you, too, this combination. You guys are...
A whole Indignity series.
Yeah, right. There are other parts of the culture that are
The Indignities of Being a Man will be our next one.
We see that every day, I think, these days.
Please keep us posted, because it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
always nice to visit with you, Merrill Markoe.
Nice to see you, Mark Thompson.
And if you want to...
my fellow vegan.
I know. Merrill was left to me by Sam Simon.
That's right.
The legacy of Sam Simon, a great thing. J. Elvis?
Yes?
Thank you for participating.
My pleasure. On October 15th, I'll be at Largo opening for my buddy Chad Daniels, and then I'll be at Acme Comedy Club 16th through 20th.
Look at you on the comedy scene.
La-di-da. Look at this road dog.
You do stand up too, right?
Yeah, sadly. Yes.
You do love it though, don't you?
I mean, yeah. No, yes, I do. What am I up to? I host an unpaid bar show every Monday in Echo Park. So I got a lot going on for me too.
Can I have a set?
Yeah, of course you can.
There we go.
There you go.
I just did business.
This is about the name of the show is The Business. So there we go. We're creating relationships right here.
I love it. Thank you guys. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thanks for joining us for this episode with Megan and Merrill and J. Elvis and Michael Shure. And without you, we don't have a show. So appreciate you very much listening. You can reach the show at edgewithmarkthompson@gmail.com. Until next time, bye-bye.
Get more of The Edge on Stitcher and iTunes, or go to our website, edge-show.com.
Check out their website, edge-show.com.